Let's talk to a man who's had many a clash with Sir John Major before on these issues. His name is Sir Bill Cash. He's a Conservative MP for Stone. He's chairman of the Commons European Scrutiny Committee. But perhaps, almost most famously, Sir Bill, you're also one of the people described as using the B word by Sir John Major some years ago over the Maastricht Treaty. He implied that your parents had not been married at the time of your birth.
Well, I must say, I thought it was a very sad speech, actually. Here is a man who actually put through the Maastricht Treaty without a referendum, despite the fact that we had the Maastricht referendum campaign. And Julia, you can probably remember this.
Just
because,
about, Bill. Don't be rude.
It was a massive campaign. We got hundreds of thousands of signatures at the time. And in addition to that, of course, he refused to have a referendum, absolutely refused. And then when it came to the actual voting, I voted against the Maastricht Treaty, I think it's 48 times on a three-line whip. Basically, for one simple reason, that this Maastricht Treaty created European government. And whether or not there was some hope that we'd be able to find an arrangement within the framework of the European Common Market, which was then known as the European Community, or not, the fact is that the creation of European government, the citizens' rights, the whole panoply of European government, increasing majority voting, etc., was so objectionable because it was clear that it was intended to be part of the Jean Monnet movement towards political union.
And they weren't secretive about it. It was openly stated.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in 1952, for example, and this is not just something which has been sort of whisked out of nowhere. No, in 1952 and continuously, people like Jean Monnet said, we must unconsciously lead the people of Europe, pretending that it is an economic proposal, into a political federation.
And this is the key bit, isn't it? I mean, those of us who, got lives and jobs and families and World Book Day costumes to prepare, don't spend our time worrying about things like the Maastricht Treaty. But the thing is, we voted in '75 to continue our membership, having gone in a couple of years earlier,
of the European Community.
It was a customs union, yes. But it was an economic arrangement. It was a trading bloc arrangement. The Maastricht Treaty in '92, which came into force in '93, that changed things. That made it a political union, not an economic union. Now, as you say, there was no referendum for the British people on it then.
Yep.
He didn't. Sir John Major did not give a free vote to MPs. It was a whipped vote, and you got in a lot of trouble. But this is the thing. He's now saying that we should have a free vote in the House of Commons on this issue, and that there should, if necessary, although he would prefer Parliament to have the final say, there should be a referendum. So what do you say to him on that?
Well, quite frankly, if he wasn't prepared to give a referendum in the first place, it's hypocritical now to say that there should be a referendum on this. He says this is a unique situation, this the position we're in now. There's nothing unique about it except the fact that it's actually been decided, first of all, because Parliament gave a referendum at last, thanks to a huge campaign by so many people to achieve that referendum, in particular 81 Conservatives plus many others who forced David Cameron's hand. But in addition to that, that was passed by 6-1 in the House of Commons and in the House of Lords, for that matter, because they passed it as well. Then you have the Article 50 Treaty, the Article 50 Act of Parliament, which was passed by 499 to about 120. Then on top of that, you then have the Withdrawal Bill, which was passed by the House of Commons a couple of months, about 8 weeks ago, which was passed by a significant majority, even though the Labour Party and the SNP voted against it, and the Liberal Democrats. So for practical purposes, there is absolutely no justification whatsoever in saying that this has not been a democratic decision. And in the general election, 85% of all the people who were voting for political parties were voting for political parties who specifically stated, and being the Conservative, may I just add, it was in our manifesto as well, that this whole project of leaving the European Union was accepted by those
Well,
political
do
parties.
you think then that there is, as some have suggested, sort of a war by proxy by Remainers, that this is a coordinated campaign? I find it quite unlikely that we happen to have seen a senior Mandarin who used to work in Gillian Fox's office happening to pop up on the Today programme on the day he's making a speech, and then happens to be Sir John Major and happens to be Tony Blair.
No,
And it just
no,
happens
this
to
is
be in the
highly
major
organised.
week like this when we know Theresa May's making her
This is
big
a
speech.
highly organised attack on British democracy. That's what it is. And as a matter of fact, I had a letter in the Daily Telegraph pointing out the fact that if people look at the history of this, for example, they read a book by Hugo Young, who was one of the great Remainers, journalistic Remainers back in the 1990s and so on, called This Blessed Plot, he shows exactly how the civil service actually was determined, or elements in the civil service, the most important, like Con O'Neill and Robinson and people like that, were absolutely determined to go for an integrated Europe. And there's a very interesting book called The Price of Victory, where these are recorded interviews. These aren't just opinions. They are tape-recorded interviews by people who are making it absolutely clear they're civil servants who absolutely were determined to get this through at all costs because they believe passionately in the idea of a political union.
But just find it, I mean, Sir John Major says, many electors know they were misled, he said. Many more are beginning to realise it. He says the electorate has every right to reconsider their decision. What would you say to
Were
that?
they? Well, they weren't. They weren't misled one bit. And the reality is that there was an absolutely clear position set out in the manifestos in the general election. That's number one. Secondly, there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever that the whole idea of political union lies at the heart of this. It's a democratic question, and it's about time these people who are trying to upset it realize how fundamentally undemocratic they are, and wrong, because we haven't got time to go into it, Julia, another time.
We haven't.
Perhaps. But the reality is that they're wrong because the effect of the United Kingdom being taken, if you take the speeches of Juncker, you take the speeches of Macron recently, if those speeches had been made before the referendum, it wouldn't have been 52%, it would have been 65 or 70.
Yes, because they were keeping quiet, because they didn't want to let the cat out of the bag. So Bill Cash, Tory MP for Stone, a Eurosceptic long before it was fashionable. He's chair of the Commons European Scrutiny Committee, and of course one of those B words described by Sir John Major in an interview way back over the Maastricht Treaty.